Hello, everyone. My name is CyrusHojjaty, YouTube user Cyrus992. I am here with Rob Means, and tell me about your organization and what you do.
Well, Cyrus, glad to be with you. I'm Rob, and I'm with LoopWorks. This is the company that is creating the advanced transit system here in Milpitas, California, around the new BART station and the Great Mall, which is a regional retail center here. It's going to be a dual loop system that just serves about 1.5 square miles with a demonstration project. We're really trying to demonstrate that this technology makes sense, that it works, it costs roughly what we're saying it costs, and that people really do use it. And one other aspect, of course, is that many studies, we've got a dozen studies that say that when you overlay existing transit with PRT technology, that the ridership on all the transit will double, triple, or more. So we're looking forward to getting some numbers back on that and see what really happens, because as most of your viewers might know at this point, transit agencies for decades have been trying to raise their ridership numbers unsuccessfully. So this could be a real breakthrough in making that happen.
Yeah, and there's only like a handful of agencies in this country that have a good number of ridership. But before we begin, I want everybody to know that this channel, we have talked about a variety of urban planning issues ranging from transportation, land use, architecture, the list goes on. And what we believe is the way things have been built in our society for the last 80, 90 years. You know, when we moved away from a more traditional system to a more modern system that is heavily car dependent, regardless of the housing type you have, has offered a lot of flaws, concerns, and not to mention a whole list of other costs. So as a result, you know, there have been efforts for the last few decades to provide some really serious alternatives, even though not all of the alternatives have been all that great. There has been, you know, some opposition, but finally we seem to believe that there are new ideas that are kicking ground, and we're going to see some huge revolutionary breakthroughs. And by the way, the reason, in case of your viewers don't know, I am based here in Las Vegas. Your city, Milpitas, is not too far from San Jose. It is about 30 miles away from San Francisco. I moved here to start a master plan city. You know, we have a lot of available land. We can create things out of scratch. And you really cannot have an effective master plan city without a truly cost-effective transportation system. And we cannot deny that there's going to be a lot of people who do not desire or cannot afford to go on or even share personal vehicles, as a matter of fact, not to mention they have plenty of flaws as well.
No, I was just agreeing with you that, you know, the automobile has brought a lot of mobility, but it's also carried along with it a lot of problems, and it's really reached the limits of the technology and what we can do with it, especially now that we're electrifying it and also putting automated systems in to drive those around. But the limitations in terms of roadway space particularly in developed areas. So your idea of starting with a clean canvas and building from scratch a system, a development that takes into account transportation as being keystone to making things work in that area is really a good idea that we're doing.
So we have a lot of people advocating for autonomous vehicles, not to mention we have recently and are currently expanding the Vegas Loop, and that has its own separate guideway or at-grade system. So why would the PRTs would be a better decision than those two? Is it because they're taking up less space, they don't require a lot of weight, they don't conflict with other traffic flow? Why so?
Yeah, all of those are true. You know, you're not conflicting with other traffic flow, whether that's, you know, kids chasing balls out in the street or, cyclists or dogs or whatever. So you're not at ground level with most of the PRT designs that have been produced. They're talking about elevated guideways. So they're 16 feet up in the air.
16, okay.
Yeah, that's so that semi trucks can get underneath them, and then
Okay.
so they're really out of the way. They're not messing with all of us down here at ground level. So that's one advantage over automobiles. The other one that I mentioned earlier is we're running out of space. We've got a 4-lane expressway going through town and a 4-lane freeway going through town. And to expand that to add extra lanes is becomes prohibitively expensive, because now you're starting to do condemnations and removal of buildings and such. And so it's just they're not going to be able to widen any further as the traffic congestion increases.
And just to keep in mind that your area land is no joke. Land is very scarce. You're having a really housing crunch in terms of space, in terms of units available. So that can make a huge difference. And not to mention, those freeways can impact desirability levels. So that can impact property values. And a lot of people don't want to move to those freeways, especially if those freeways are not sunken like 15 feet below ground. Therefore, when we look at autonomous vehicles, even though you don't have to drive them, even though you don't have to own them, they still have plenty of inefficiencies.
Also, they're going to create additional demand for the existing roadway space, which is already oversubscribed, shall we say, because you're going to get a lot of the latent demand. Folks that cannot drive or don't wish to drive will now be willing to, jump in one of these automated vehicles and get on the road. And then once they get dropped off, that automated vehicle needs to relocate itself. So we're going to see a significant increase in the actual usage of our roadways when the automated vehicles become more common.
It's already happening with the rideshare programs, Uber, Lyft. The drivers are going around picking drivers up. It takes up absolutely a lot of capacity, and people don't know that. And then they're talking about, taxing them and regulating them. But it's just, that really doesn't solve the heart of the problem. So before we begin, can you elaborate more? What is PRT, which is personal rapid transit? And not to mention, if you like to talk about what is GRT, group rapid transit. So start with PRT.
So personal rapid transit starts with small vehicles, and more importantly, lightweight, so that we really can elevate them up to that 16-foot guideway without it costing a lot for the guideway, which is more than 50% of the cost of a system.
And it can be, sorry to interrupt, underground and at ground too, right?
That's true. Generally speaking, in the industry, you figure at grade is going to cost X, elevated is going to cost 2X, and underground is going to cost 3X. So we're trying to avoid going underground, and where possible, in fact, glideways, I think that's key to their keeping their costs down, is by keeping a lot of their infrastructure at ground level. But getting back to what PRT is, when we say personal, it's essentially like the inside of a car in terms of space. So you can expect that you'll be riding by yourself most of the time, although sometimes, there will be one or two other people that with you. But for the most part, it's personal. Like our cars, we can imagine an average of 1.1 people per cab, kind of a thing going around. Now, the one thing about automated vehicles that is kind of nice is that it is a shared resource. So not everybody needs to have their own car, and PRT is like that also. It's a shared resource, so that here in America, we really haven't quite internalized that we're living on a limited planet with limited resources, and for everybody to have a car, that really taxes the system. So anytime we can look to be sharing resources, that's probably a good idea, and PRT does that in a number of good ways that keeps our resource consumption down.
Especially and now you talk about GRT, but then a lot of people are thinking like, well, why should I want to share? Who are you to tell me what to do? But go on.
Well, GRT, or Group Rapid Transit, says, okay, let's have a larger vehicle with a larger guideway, which is going to be more expensive. And They've done that at Suncheon Bay. They did that in the original system in Morgantown, West Virginia, at the university there when they built the original one 50 years ago. Again, they had a larger vehicle that you could put,
50
10 or
years
12.
ago, 50 years
Yes,
ago, this technology has been wow, and yet still it
yeah,
hasn't been unbelievable.
yeah. Still hasn't really been adopted much else. There's a couple of small systems. Heathrow Airport, Masdar City in Abu Dhabi, Suncheon
Hmm.
Bay in South Korea. But the number of they've all been kind of one-off systems that have not actually grown and expanded. Um, so we're looking to provide that a system that can grow, can expand, and in my mind, most importantly, be replicated by others wherever. Because we are starting with, unlike other PRT vendors, we're starting with an open source design that has no patents that are unexpired, and so anybody can take our design and apply it in their situation wherever.
That's a pretty good, interesting point of view you have there. I guess what scratches a lot of people's minds is that why haven't we seen this? Is there just a lot of skepticism? Is it just that maybe there's something that a lot of people know, the experts see that it just doesn't make it very feasible? Why haven't we seen this dominant? Yet,
I
and yet
I don't know. I've got guesses.
The powers that be just want to keep pushing, at grade light rail, streetcars, buses, even though we know these are very secondhand.
Yeah, those are older technologies that don't fit well with our current cities, which are sprawling cities. Back in the days when cities were more concentrated and separated than a string of pearls kind of corridor concept that is, whether it's light rail or commuter rail, it made sense then. But now we've got sprawling cities that really need a network, not a corridor kind of a system. So PRT brings that to the table.
It would be spectacular if a lot of people in power, wealthy investors and politicians, be on board with this, because as you know, once they do, the chance of being implemented goes up a lot.
Yeah.
Not to mention the fact that the word would get out. And I think that's the other issue, is that a lot of people are just not aware of such technologies. They're just so used to thinking, oh, it's just either shared transit or private vehicles. Well, they're not really private when you think about it. They're running on public streets. So that's one of the misconceptions that we have there. So this is the thing that I wanted to tell you, because we have a lot of people that claim that we have really the green agenda that's really dominant in the state of California. They're trying to do everything they can to reduce our carbon footprint, fight climate change, be green as possible. But yet, what really ticks off a lot of people, what's very, very shocking, is that in addition to the fact that in land use policies, it's still very difficult to build high rises in many of the expensive areas of California, whether it's San Francisco and LA. They've got a lot of single family or height restrictions that they have. Not to mention, when you think about that, that makes you think that they're really not, trying to save the earth. But in addition to the fact that they keep pushing electric vehicles, there's just so much desire by that establishment to do that. But yet again, according to your analysis, PRTs are much more efficient on the environment, and not to mention the costs and everything else. So if they really wanted to get us out of our cars, if they really wanted us to save the earth, they would be pushing PRT. But yet it seems a lot of the folks in the California legislature, even at the federal level, not to mention, correct me if I'm wrong, the Milpitas City Council, they're not really on board with this. So are we really seeing their true colors of who they are?
I am not quite willing to go to that extent yet, Cyrus. There's a phenomenon called the Semmelweis reflex. It's the tendency to basically disregard any information or ideas that contradict the existing paradigms or beliefs. And I think that all these folks are dealing with, okay, well, if we're going to be moving people, we need to have large containers to move them, even though they themselves got where they got to in an automobile, which is a small vehicle. So, and just a little bit of background on Semmelweis reflex. The doctor Semmelweis back in the 1840s discovered that, you know, if doctors wash their hands between patients, the maternal mortality rate drops by 90%. And he showed the data around and nobody took it seriously. They just ignored it. 20 years later, the germ theory came on board. It took another 20 years before folks actually started washing their hands between patients, and another 20 years before it became standard operating practice. So this idea of a Semmelweis reflex where you just automatically, and in the political realm, we call it facts bounce off of beliefs. So if somebody already has a belief and a fact comes in that contradicts it, it just kind of bounces right off.
That's what I wanted to get to, because a lot of people are just so much in a position that they don't want new ideas to burst their bubble. And that's the harsh reality. But sooner or later, more and more people will wake up and they will have to really accept reality, because a lot of people, even everyday people, they're so used to the status quo and they just don't want to change it. Now, speaking of the status quo, we have seen transit projects grow a lot across the country and even much of the world. When you look at Seattle, when you look at all across the West Coast, you know, because West Coast has been catching up, because that side of the country, they've had transit systems, they're using them, what they have for over a century now, whether it's Chicago, New York, Boston, and so forth. But here in the West, we have these BART expansions. In fact, many reports show there's very, very costly, not just per mile compared to many parts of the world, but even the Second Avenue subway was more cost effective. I mean, I think it was like, what, 4 miles of BART around San Jose that was going to cost like over $5 billion or $10 billion. I'm not sure. We have these people, you know, whether it is RM Transit, that YouTube user, many of these pro-transit advocates say, well, no, forget about PRT. The future of transportation doesn't rely on a pod. And you've done a massive response through your email debunking his claims. And the main reason is the fact that they just don't believe. And even your charts show it has the capacity. Now, it can obviously replace the buses, the trolleys, a lot of other things, but many see that it doesn't have the capacity to replace heavy rail, nor does it have the speed to replace high-speed rail. So what do you say about that? Do you just build more lines? So let's say in San Francisco, you know, you have one heavy rail line, which is the BART. So in order to meet the capacity, you just build more lines. You build more lines all over the city, and then you'll have the capacity. What's your response?
Well, first off, most of those folks that are concerned about capacity have never bothered to run the numbers. And we've got the numbers on our website, but the short story is that the BART technology can handle up to 50,000 people per hour. This is a subway technology, big trains, frequent passing through.
Yeah.
But that's not needed in this BART extension, which is 6 miles. And as you said, started at about $5 billion, then went to 7. Recently, the latest estimate is $12 billion for 6 miles of underground BART.
And I don't mean to interrupt. The thing is that highway systems and the car infrastructure, major arterial routes that are 6 lanes in the neighborhoods, they can cost a lot of money too. And not to mention all the private costs, even subsidies for parking and a lot of other things. Because we have a lot of people say, well, transit projects cost a lot of money. You know, cars is the way to go. But then nevertheless, they don't tell you all the hidden costs with car infrastructure, which a lot of times have had plenty of federal intervention. But go ahead.
Well, and as an example there, a lot of roads in California are subpar because they have not been maintained because it takes
Yeah.
money to maintain them. And that hasn't been built into the system as well as it should have been.
Caltrans is pretty shady. My cousin works there. Yeah.
Again, I'm not willing to go there. I don't know exactly what's going
Because
on
some
with that.
states
I
are
know
not
it's
so
at the
bad. The
local
freeways are
level.
pretty good here in Las Vegas. Go
Well,
ahead.
here at the actually the I think they've shifted money around in our California state highway system is coming up to par. I was actually talking about local municipal Milpitas roadways, for example. The one out in front of my street is um, needs work, and it's not the only one in town. And they were basically things were deteriorating at a rate of about $2 million per year, and they were investing about $1 million per year in fixing things. So you can see how that can spiral out of control eventually.
We'll get back to why PRTs are significantly better than trains, and will they be able to fully replace them? Like
So
even
if we're
in
getting back to
large inner urban areas, like parts of the Northeast and Chicago. Go ahead.
well, again, it's the actual occupancy is small per cab, but if you've got a lot of cabs happening frequently, then you've essentially got a lane of freeway traffic where you've got 2,000 vehicles per hour, and if you've got 1.1 uh, people per vehicle, then you've got roughly 2,000 people per hour being transported on a lane. You can do the same with PRT using a
Really?
2 second gap there. But as you and I know, we get on the freeway and sometimes there's really only a 1 second gap. So suddenly we've been able to double if we reduce the headways on our cabs to down to 1 second. We've gone from 2,000 cabs or riders per hour to 4,000. And again, if we shrink that down even further to a half a second, which is technologically possible with this technology, then we've gone up to 8,000 per guideway. Now, if you have a parallel guideway, now you can double that. And when we're really talking about networks, that is what we're talking about, is a lot of parallel guideways going between the east
Mm-hmm.
side and the west side, or the north and the south, kind of a thing.
And you don't think, however, because I spoke to one SkyTran executive about several years ago, I think it was back in 2015, because I've been aware of this technology for about 10 years or so. They tell me, however, it's not going to replace high-speed rail systems. So, there is a possibility that, for example, if you want to get from San Jose to San Francisco, you will get on a high-speed rail that will go about 200 miles an hour, and then you get on a PRT that will take you exactly to where your destination. Is that true?
So,
Because you can't use
it depends.
PRT to go from literally for hundreds of miles. That's what he told me. He actually passed away, believe it or not.
That actually, I would probably agree with that for
Mm-hmm.
for intercity. When you're talking about more than 100 miles between cities, then you're really going to need something that goes faster than an automobile. And but the thing is that our current commuter rail, if you're talking about a region like the San Francisco Bay Area, and you're
Yes.
talking about the commuter rail, whether it's the Caltrain or the BART system, they BART in particular can get up above 80 miles per hour, but because they have to stop, dwell, and accelerate
Yes.
back up to speed, their average speed is half of that. It's really at 40 miles per hour. Well, take this PRT design. Now, SkyTran, like you, I was introduced to PRT technology through SkyTran back in the year 2000, when they were really early on in the game. But the thing is, I don't know about their design, but apparently they are not capable of doing 80 plus miles per hour as this particular design is capable of doing. So if you can do 80 miles per hour, you're
Mm-hmm.
already, but you don't stop like the BART trains do, then you've got a technology that can transport the people twice as fast
Wow.
as that technology for 1/10 of the price. So,
One
when
tenth.
I
Oh
say
yeah,
things
that's
like
right.
that,
We're gonna get to that.
I
Mhm.
expect to get questions and conversation coming back from these transit professionals, but I get silence, which just gets us back to our Semmelweis reflex.
Well,
Uh-oh.
I,
Okay.
I, I guess I was wanting to ask, could this really work in Tokyo and Hong Kong? Because, I would imagine that in those areas, I mean, the PRT would have overcapacity. You see, and that's the thing. That's why, not every system can work everywhere 100% or, can completely replace one thing or another. But then again, I mean, we don't have Hong Kong densities here or anytime soon.
No, we don't. But I imagine that even in the density of Hong Kong, that they could probably find space for PRT, which would do it dramatically relieve the demand for ground-based transportation.
We have a lot of people, and even this has happened in your area about 10 years ago, especially, claiming that, okay, so we're so used to the status quo. And they have this conception to believe that their car dependent lifestyle, whether you look at the freeways, the arterial routes, the strip mall office parks with their massive parking lots, the cul-de-sac maze like housing subdivisions, this planning system, which, by the way, can exist in low density or high density, regardless.
Yep.
They think that that is what the people want. And when they see whether what has been done across the Bay Area, the transit-oriented development, whether they see perhaps what we're doing, what we're advocating, we're told that we're tyrants, we're trying to control people what they want, we're telling them how they should live their lives. We're getting orders from these elites, especially from the United Nations, Agenda 21 and what have you. What do you really say about that? Because I would imagine, I really, do you see yourself as an agent of control? Because I would imagine you're actually doing the opposite.
Uh, no, I don't see myself as an agent of control, and I've got a lot of evidence to show that I don't control a lot. So, no,
Well, the
yeah,
opposite's true because their system was heavily pushed by codes, regulations, subsidies, zoning laws, a lot of federal intervention, the Federal Housing Administration, the Interstate Highway Act. The Federal Reserve gave a lot of loans for these larger homes and these cars and what have you. I mean, most people, they don't really buy things up from their pockets. So go ahead.
in terms of control, though, I don't see this PRT as being a way of controlling people. I see it as a way of empowering people, and I also see it as a new way of doing things that we all want to do. And I guess we could liken it to the cell phone. Who the hell needed one of the original cell phones? We all had landlines then. But the cell phone brought to the game certain advantages that caused it to sweep across the country, in fact, the world, in basically about 10 years. It just started to dominate the telecommunications industry.
Well, a lot of people pointed out that it has actually made some things worse. But, yesterday, this woman, I think her name is Peggy Hall, and she is one of these like right-wing conservative advocates. And of course, you can agree with them on many issues, but on this issue, I think she really went overboard. And she was pointing out, oh, okay, there is United Nations Agenda 21. And do you see that bike lane that's being built? They're trying to control you, even though bike travel has some efficiencies that beat the car. And then she's saying, well, they're trying to get rid of our cars. You see that roundabout that's being built? Oh, that's control. They're telling us what to do. And I'm like, well, you're showing roundabouts with 2 car lanes. So you're telling us, okay, they're trying to get rid of our cars, but yet they're building roundabouts everywhere. In fact, roundabouts are being built in the new outward areas of metro areas. Roundabouts were invented in Europe about 50, 60 years ago. It doesn't come from the UN. it's just they can't really make their points really clear. Once you really start investigate their point of views, you realize you just don't really put the puzzle pieces together. But obviously, they're saying that what you are doing is you're trying to take away people's cars and freedoms, and you want to just stuff people in a pod and tell people where they should go. In fact, it's really the opposite what you're doing. You're freeing people from having to have insurance and accidents and ticketing and having to maintain a vehicle, and not to mention the codes we've had that encouraged car dependency. The list goes on, and all the savings that people can encounter. I mean, this you could write this monthly for about what, $50 a month. So how do you explain this stuff?
Um, it's, this is a technology that provides more equity, more opportunity for people. You've pointed out repeatedly the cost of car ownership. Well, that's an issue for 2/3 of our people, because they actually have driver's licenses and they can use that technology. But 1/3 of our people don't have that ability. Either they are too young to drive, they're too old to drive, they were too drunk at the wrong point in time to be driving nowadays. They're too handicapped. And in fact, this is really where we ought
Yeah.
to see some real adoption, is from the
Well,
handicapped community.
the woman says, well, elderly people need cars. They can't get her. I'm like, what are you talking about? Go ahead.
Well, elderly people need transportation. They've got to get to and from medical, social events, whatever. But is it going to be in an automated vehicle that comes to their door, picks them up, and takes them there on the standard roadway? Or are we going to encourage them to walk, a few blocks to the local PRT station? Because remember, what we're talking about here is putting 8 stations in every square mile as kind of an average.
Wow. Thought it was
So there's going to
two.
be a station within, several blocks of you that you can actually walk to, get on the vehicle. It'll take you within a few blocks of where you want to go, and you can walk that last leg. And as we've seen from health studies, and that people walking is one of the better exercises and tends to keep your population healthy, which is why I hear that New York is healthier, generally speaking, than most cities, because people have to walk to transit.
Yeah, I noticed that like in the second day I was there, there's barely any obese people.
Maybe they're all hiding inside and they don't go anywhere. I don't know what's happening, but maybe it is. They're actually less obese people there
And
because they're exercising a
and
bit.
I forgot to talk about the health benefits. Yeah.
Yeah. So the technology offers a lot to everyone, and I anticipate, because of that, that in the service area, we'll see a lot of shifting going from the private automobile to the public transit systems that are available, primarily because if you can get onto the PRT, it will take you either close to where you want to go, or to a transit hub or a transit connection that will really get you where you want to go, kind of a thing.
That's cool. And correct me if I'm wrong, the cost is 1/10 of light rail. So that's going to be very cost effective, so much that private developers or governments are willing to chip in, and there would be far less opposition. Because I think one of the concerns we have, not just with the BART subway, but also the California high speed rail, which we don't know if the money's being laundered, is that it costs so much we can't afford it. But your system is costing a lot less, right? And
Much, much
then
less,
what
yes.
would be the fares too, as well?
And the fares are really a political decision. In this area, the fares are set at a level that we require 85 cents on the dollar in terms of public subsidies. 15 cents on the dollar comes from the fare box, 85 cents on the dollar comes from taxes paid by taxpayers.
Wow.
So it's really a political decision as to how much a system will be charging its users. There is evidence and a study that indicates that in a system as small as 10 square miles, a profit can be turned by charging a actual reasonable fare of $1 to $2. So until we actually build the demonstration project and get a better handle on the numbers, We don't know for sure, but it
Will
does
they
look
vary?
like
Will the fares vary? Like
the fares
Uber?
could vary. Yeah, it actually, in our situation, I won't even talk about our specifics about how we plan on doing our charging. But yeah, there's going to be some variable charges. But it's a political decision as to how much you're going to be charging until you get into a for-profit business where I say, hey, there's opportunity here for for-profit businesses to get involved, use the technology that we're talking about because it's open source, it's relatively inexpensive to build, and we think that a profit can be made in an area as small as 10 square miles.
One of the concerns that people have about transit is the safety, where there's been a lot of incidents of violence, of robberies, homelessness. So can you explain to me how your system is better? Because we have a lot of people will mention things that, well, a lot of people don't want to hear. Well, the demographics of the people who ride the mass transit systems, we've got the border crisis and they want to use transit, not to mention, all these drug addicts. How would you respond to that?
Well, first off, I draw the distinction between safety and security. And I think what we're talking about now is essentially security, because you're talking about other people deliberately doing something bad to you, as opposed to safety, which is the system itself won't be doing things bad to you. So let's address that safety issue first. And probably the best example or data is to look at the PRT system at Morgantown University in West Virginia, where they've been operating for nearly 50 years now. They have 80 million passenger miles without a serious injury, which makes it far safer than the automobile. So in terms of safety, because the technology is up there, it's out of the way, it doesn't have crossing and mixing with other transit, it is extremely safe. In terms of security, it's also much better than the technologies, the mass transit technologies that we're accustomed to. For one thing, you don't have large concentrations of people in one particular place. I think there was a poisoning on a Tokyo station a dozen years ago or something. So you don't have that. You also, in terms of being able to go to a stop, you don't have to wait for a bus to come along and pick you up, however long that might be. If you go to one of our PRT stations, there will be a cab waiting for you most all of the time, and they're within a few minutes. So you're not left exposed at a bus stop for 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes where someone with nefarious intent might cause you harm. The other thing, of course, is that it's a personal rapid transit. The only person in the cab with you is somebody that you allowed in with you, your daughter, your kid, your dog, whatever. But it's not going to be some stranger that looks like you wouldn't want to be with this person. You just get in your cab and you go, leaving them behind.
Yeah.
So I think both the safety and security issues are addressed much better with PRT than they are with bus or light rail or commuter rail.
Mm-hmm. I guess the $1 million question is, how do we implement this in our local communities? Because I know San Jose, correct me if I'm wrong, is building something similar along the airport, and I want to know what your thoughts on that.
So the company that's doing that is Glideways. My understanding is they just got another round of funding. They're a private business. Like most of the PRT companies out there, they're looking to make a profit. At this point, what they've done is gone to the city of San Jose and said, hey, everybody agrees that having a link between the train station, Caltrain station, which is going to be a high-speed rail station, they hope, that transit hub, and the airport, which is another transit hub, which are about 3 miles apart, we should have a connection between these two. And Glideways is saying, hey, that ought to be something like our technology, our PRT technology. So here's what we're going to do for you. We will do a study all on our dime and give you all this wonderful information. And hopefully you'll say, yeah, go ahead and build it. So that's where they stand right now.
So things are being done. Good.
Things are being done. There's down in New Zealand, there's apparently a development there.
India's planning to.
India's planning. I guess I'm more familiar or like to bring this other outfit up. It's called Swift Cities. It's a spin-off from Google. And they have a proprietary technology that they're trying to implement down in New Zealand. And they say they've got a number of other outfits and cities that are interested in it. So there's lots of conversation happening now that will be probably capped off this December 1st when the PodCar conference happens here in San Jose.
There's many companies being involved. Swift, there was SkyTran, that was one of the representatives I spoke to several years ago. That didn't seem to really go anywhere. The design was pretty cool. And then there's also SNAAP, and they're based in Tennessee. I spoke to one of the executives about a year ago. They seem to be very optimistic they can get something done there. So there's a lot of different types of people that are really getting on board with this. But I guess the heart of the issue is, for this to really work, is our cities have to be very pedestrian friendly. And what that means is that if you look at the width of the street, the speed of the cars, the side of the width of the sidewalks, the height of the buildings, the design of the buildings, the layout of the traffic flow, all these things matter, because if you have these cul-de-sacs, these maze-like subdivisions, well, they're really not going to work too well. So that does matter. So what we're trying to build out here in the outskirts of Las Vegas is trying to build something like that. And you'd have a PRT system, and we'll have multiple stations. You know, we could have, perhaps worst case scenario, a station every half a mile or so, because I think people can walk for 1,200 feet. It's not that big of a deal. And then those PRT systems can connect to the rest of Las Vegas, particularly the Strip, and hopefully that can replace the Tesla loops, the boring company. And that's exactly what we can do. The thing is, I think that this planning process should take place even in the outskirts of the cities, including, believe it or not, that new city that billionaires are planning in between San Francisco and Sacramento.
This is news to me. I'm not sure. I'm not aware of that particular development, but yeah, any new development at this point should be looking at personal rapid transit technology to not only for internal circulation, but to get out to more populous areas and to transit centers.
Okay, and did you answer my question effectively, how people can bring this to their local communities?
That is really a political issue, but the bad news is that at this point in time, the funding from the Federal Transit Administration seems to be restricted by their definition of what public transit is. And they say that it is shared ride, ground-based. So yes, PRT is connected to the ground every 60 to 90 feet with a post, but mostly it's happening up there.
Do you think that maybe the presidential candidates who are running, and you don't have to answer this question, could be on board with this? We could have maybe some of them come into town, and they'll. What do you think?
Well, I did an experiment of my own, Cyrus, in the last election cycle. I went to candidates that were going to be representing Milpitas residents and said, hey, what do you think about this project? And frankly, I was surprised that a majority of them said, yeah, I support this project. Website, if you need that, we can find that. But I think that is a question that really needs to be asked of candidates across the board. Are you in favor of doing an experiment here, supporting a project that shows whether this technology can work for us or not?
Once you increase the traffic capacity, once there's a lesser concern of housing, then the fears of more housing supply, which people think will lead to more traffic, that concern actually dies down. So which means that we'll have more room for housing, we have more traffic capacity. And if you have that, then the cost of housing will come down because there's more supply. And we're seeing rents in the Oakland area and even here start to come down. Actually, Minneapolis, they loosened their restrictions. Their rents have been coming down a lot since 2018. And I know they had riots there, but the restrictions do play a role. So if we build this system, we expand the housing supply, we reduce housing and transport costs, we can really raise the standard of living for a lot of people, especially in California, because I think California is kind of stuck. They don't want to grow because they fear traffic. And then when they can't grow, the price of homes go up. This just leads to a complete, utter disaster.
I agree with you that PRT really could change the change the equation substantially. Here in California, they changed the rules of the game so that the zoning that has prohibited multi-housing units on single lots has been changed so that now you can build up to 4 units on a standard residential lot now.
Cool.
That's when the real concern about parking comes into play, because right now in my neighborhood, things are really parked up and people
I wish I
don't
thought about
want
that
more
sooner.
people here. But
yeah,
if you alleviate that problem, if you say, okay, hey, we're going to put a PRT station within a couple of blocks of your residence, so any renters that you have that are going, or the additional homeowners coming into this area, they can use the transit rather than using a personal automobile that they want to park on your street and congest things.
cool. Yeah, and all that parking takes up a lot of space that could be used for bikes and more sidewalks and all the other things. There's just an endless list of concerns. A quick random question, though. You think this would stand earthquakes, right? Yes or no?
Oh, absolutely. It's like any other thing that gets built, it's going to have to run through the engineers and their modeling system so that they know that in a whatever the current standard is, it can handle that level of earthquake without falling over.
Because we saw what the Loma Prieta did to some of the freeways in that area. This leads me to, because you talk about housing solutions and congestion, because there was this one YouTube user in Southern California. He goes under by the name Grindle61, and he's been doing a lot of activism. Now, he hasn't made a video in 2 years. I met his friend about last weekend out in Southern California. They've been fighting all these regional agencies where they were going to add new transit lines. They were going to do some infill development. And I was like, okay, first of all, I agree there's some shady things going on, but again, they don't have any solution to the congestion problem. They don't have a solution to the housing problem. And then I tell them, okay, well, how do you solve the problem? Well, we'll just get rid of the illegal aliens and that's going to make things better and all that kind of stuff. That's going to be good for the environment. Okay, yes, that can help, but there's a lot of areas of the country that doesn't really have a lot of immigration and they're having many problems. And just because you get rid of them doesn't mean you really solve the problem, because if the prices go down and then more people move back in from other parts of the country, well, then what ends up happening is you don't really end up solving the problem. But again, they don't really have a solution. They just think what they have is what the people want, even though that's not really true. A lot of people are not satisfied. Having mentioned that, when we bring these solutions, we will open their minds, and many of their viewers, especially, just like the one I just debunked last night, they will start to waken up.
That's certainly the hope. But
and I debated him actually back in 2016. Go ahead.
no, just with as evidence accumulates and as people see things happening, then it'll be easier to break down that Semmelweis reflex. But at this point in time, it still seems to be strongly in place. People still don't want to think about out-of-the-box solutions. But our climate crisis is really forcing us to start thinking about out-of-the-box solutions, or risk the collapse of civilization.
Well, even if you don't believe in climate change, if you think it's a hoax and you think windmills and geothermal energy, all that kind of stuff is completely useless. We should just use fossil fuels. I mean, you cannot deny there are still environmental benefits. There are still efficiency benefits. There are still many other benefits that come with the PRTs. Not to mention the fact that you, as a matter of fact, you can solve the immigration problem as well, because if people are concerned and more immigrants are going to bring more traffic, well, your system will have more capacity. So, in fact, you would probably be doing more of a difference than these politicians out there.
Yes, if their solution is to do something about immigrants, yeah, that's small potatoes, but this really has the potential to attract 10, 20, 30% of the folks that are currently using automobiles to get around an area. Because if you look at the numbers, most trips are not going very far. You know, more than 50% are under 5 miles. Okay, so if you've got a service area
Yeah.
5 miles, then, you know, or 10 miles, then we should be good to attract a lot of that ridership.
Well, what bothers me is that people go more than 5 miles when it's not on a freeway or it's on a transit system, when it's a typical arterial. And you know me, I'm one of the largest critic of arterials, these 45, 50-mile-an-hour zones. They're in between streets and freeways.
Yep.
Typically, they're 3 lanes going forward, 3 lanes going back, 2 left turn lanes, 2-minute stoplight intersections. The whole system is a sham. It splits up the neighborhoods.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to look at your city to figure out what's going on. But anyway, we have to wrap it up. We've done a pretty good, amazing interview. We should definitely keep each other posted on a typical basis. So where can people get your information? Because your website is amazing. You have a lot of amazing facts, documents, images, so many pieces of data that lots of people would look into it, and they would really be open to a lot of truths, including myself, even though I've done research of it before I came to your website. Where should they go? How should they help?
So the website URL is milpitas, PRT.com. Milpitas is spelled MILPITAS, milpitasprt.com. And as you said, there's information, not only, you know, there's a lot of information about our technology and this particular project, but there's also videos about some of the other tech PRT systems that are out there, including the Morgantown version. And one last thing I'd like to say about the home page on our website. Down at the bottom, it asks the question, is PRT a disruptive technology? And there's 5 different ways that it could be seen as a disruptive technology. So I really encourage people that are looking for out-of-the-box solutions to take a look at PRT.
Absolutely, yeah. And speaking of disruptive, I was going to point out we can start putting these things in Santa Cruz. We can put these things in many cities around where you live. Go down to Monterey, San Luis Obispo, Eureka, maybe even Napa Valley. This could be a wonderful experience. I'm sure a lot of people would want to go 16 foot above ground and look at all the vineyards and valleys. All right, everybody. Thank you so much. Great pleasure. And please stay tuned. Please also subscribe to my channel, Cyrus992, which I'll have more updates on planning as well. Great pleasure. Talk to you soon.
Thank you, Cyrus.